Hey, it's Kaero. Welcome back to the channel. This is part 2 of raiding Dominaria United. Spoilers, if you haven't seen part 1, you can check it out. I'll put a link in the description. Without further ado, let's get into the latest batch. 0 is absolutely unplayable. 10 is a bomb. Let's go. So let's kick things off with a bang. Spoiler alert, if you weren't aware, our good friend Ajani has been completed by the Phyrexians. I know, very sad, but let's take a look at him and see his power level. So he's a 4-drop Planeswalker. He has hybrid mana here that can be paid with either green or white mana, but it's also Phyrexian mana. So you can, instead of paying that, pay 2 life. He comes in with 2 fewer loyalty counters. So it's either a 4-drop Planeswalker with 4 loyalty or a 3-drop 2-life Planeswalker with 2 loyalty. Alright, his +1 is reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature or Planeswalker card, put it into your hand. Otherwise, you may put it on the bottom of your library. -3, distribute 3 +1/+1 counters among up to 3 target creatures. They gain vigilance until end of turn. And -6, you get an emblem with whenever you cast a whenever you cast a creature or planeswalker spell, target opponent gets 2 poison counters. So we've got some infect stuff going on with the ultimate at -6. To get there, you're going to have to pay 4 mana for this, tick it up twice, and then -6 to get that emblem. You can almost never count on ultimating planeswalkers these days because standard has been pretty fast, and I think it's probably going to remain that way. If the format is super slow, you might be able to get that -6, but it seems a little bit disjointed from the other things. I think what Ajani really wants to be is a 4-drop planeswalker with the full loyalty. You already have your 1-drop, 2-drop, and 3-drop on the field in creatures, so you're in an aggressive Seleznia deck, and you -3. Distribute 3 +1/+1 counters among 2 or 3 creatures, attack in as you already have been doing, and then the fact that those creatures gain vigilance means that they can defend Ajani next turn from a swing back at you. And then, since it'll be at 1 loyalty, you just start ticking them up +1, revealing the top card of your library and lining up some draws. Now, if it's a creature or planeswalker, it obviously goes into your hand. That's good for Seleznia aggro decks. Otherwise, you may put it on the bottom of your library. So if you like what you see, but it is an instant or sorcery or an enchantment or whatever, you can still keep it on the top of your library. I think if we get some aggressive white cards, aggressive green cards, a lot of the good green cards right now are rotating out. But if we get some support for Ajani, he's really all dependent on what you can play turn 1, 2, and 3 to build up to him, because he can't protect himself. If you don't have any support for him, you're just paying 4. He comes down. You have no creatures to put counters on. You +1, whatever. So he's really a build around in an aggro deck. But I think he's probably good in that deck. I want to say he's probably like a 6 at this point. Potentially higher if we get some really good aggressive drops in white and green. Next up, we have an old favorite. Braids is back. Arisen Nightmare. 2 black, 1 generic for a legendary creature, Nightmare. 3/3. Pretty good stats for a 3-drop, especially in black. At the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker. And if you do, each opponent may sacrifice a permanent that shares a card type with it. For each opponent who doesn't, that player loses 2 life and you draw a card. So the potential here for a build-around deck in Rakdos Sacrifice, or even just mono black, is actually very, very strong. And I'll put it to you this way. So if you're playing aggro, let's say they've got some things that are beating you down. You put this down on turn 3, it can block their 2/2s, it can block their 1/1s. And also, if you have some tokens, say you have blood tokens, those are artifacts, you have treasure tokens, artifacts, you have token creatures. Things like Wedding Invitation that generate you 1/1 creatures, or things like Oni Cult Anvil that we saw in Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. So if you can set up an Oni Cult Anvil, sack an artifact, make a 1/1 artifact creature, sacrifice that with Braids, that leaves, it generates another one, and you have this sort of cycle, this train of sacrificing things, making them sacrifice, and if they don't, they just lose 2 life and you draw a card. So I think that the engine here with Braids combined with token generation is going to be very strong. It does require setup. Braids is not particularly good on her own. It's not like you just throw Braids out there and you're done. You're going to need token generation, you're going to need sacrifice, payoffs, and things like that to really make this and put it over the top. But I think Braids is probably a 6 or 7, maybe higher than that, if we can make sure that Oni Cult Anvil and Black Sacrifice synergies, or maybe even Orzhov with Wedding Invitation is viable. Maybe like a 7. This next card I've thought about a lot, and it seems like it's very powerful. It has a very high ceiling, but it also has some competitors that are coming up in the new standard meta. And I'll explain what those are in just a second. Cosmic Epiphany, 2 blue, 4 generic for sorcery, and you draw cards equal to the number of instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard. So if you're playing a blue-based control deck, the likelihood of you having a lot of instant and sorceries in your graveyard is actually pretty high. Even probably more so if you're playing Izzet control, because you have burn spells, you have things like Big Score that allow you to filter cards, generate treasure, and stuff like that. You also probably have sweepers in your deck if you're in Azorius control, like Doomscar is actually rotating, but you know, there are a few sweepers that we've seen. Burn Down the House is staying around. Thin the Depopulate from New Capenna is around. So if we're paying 6 for this and we get, say, 4, 5, or 6 cards off of it, that is absolutely massive card advantage on turn 6 if you can stabilize the board. However, if your opponent starts messing with your graveyard, like we've seen with the black 3-drop Werewolf, the name escapes me, from Crimson Vow, that turns in, and every time it attacks, it discards a card from your graveyard, that's going to put this very, very low power when it comes around to turn 6. You have to stabilize the board. You have to have things in your graveyard. So the competitors of this would be Memory Deluge. So that's a 4-drop, scry 4, I think, in the beginning, and draw 2 cards, and then you can flash it back. Not only does this not have flashback, but you have to wait till turn 6 to get the big payoff. So this card's going to be good if we find ourselves in a slow, control-dominated meta. If we find ourselves in an ultra-fast meta, this is probably going to be, you know, not playable, because you're going to want Memory Deluge instead. And Izzet already has Big Score and things like that to be able to draw cards earlier than this. But this is a very powerful card, so I'm going to say it's probably a 5 or a 6. Next up, we have a removal spell, Cut Down, for 1 black mana at instant speed. We always like our removal to be instant, so that's good right off the bat. And destroy target creature with total power and toughness 5 or less. So at first glance, you look at this and you're like, wait, what did it say? Power and toughness 5 or less, so I can destroy a 5/5? Cannot destroy a 5/5 with this. It's total power and toughness, meaning you add them both up. So this can kill 1 4s, 2 3s, 3 2s, 4 1s, things like that. This card is going to be quite good. This is going to be super good and limited. I think this is going to see play in most black decks, especially if we see an aggro-heavy meta, in particularly the best of 1 meta that we've seen over the past few months. If Boros aggro is still around, if mono white is still around, mono green, you're going to have a really tough time with this, right? Because their creatures are just big. So there are certain 2-drops and certain 3-drops that you're not going to be able to hit with this. Anything that's a 3/3 is out. If it's a 3/2, it's still fair game, but whenever you get into 4 4s, 5 5s, that's out. But it only costs 1 mana, meaning that if you're in a mid-range deck or something, you're fighting aggro, they have a problematic 2-drop, 3-drop, you just take this out, and you can still play your other cards and develop your board. I think this is a very strong card. I'm going to give this probably an 8 as far as removal goes. Alright, our first mono green card for today. We had Ajani, but he was Seleznia. This is just straight up green. It's 2 green, 3 generic for a Phyrexian worm creature. It's a 6/6 trample. So 5 for 6/6 trample, it's good. It's going to be able to brawl. It's going to be able to be a meat shield against things that are smaller than it. But the next text is where I think it gets absolutely way more powerful. As an additional cost to cast green permanent spells, you may pay 2 life. Those spells cost 1 forest or 1 green mana less to cast if you paid life this way. This effect reduces only the amount of green mana that you'll pay, and whenever you cast a green permanent spell, you can put a +1/+1 counter on each creature that you control. So, if we put this out on turn 5, green has the ability to maybe get it out sooner than that, say turn 4. We've got a 6/6 trample. If they deal with it, they deal with it. If they don't, we are absolutely smashing into the opponent with this thing. It's a 6/6 trample. Every other creature you get including Defiler of Vigor for every green permanent spell you cast gets counters. This thing gets out of control pretty quickly. So keep in mind that it's only permanent spells, so you can't cast like a Temio's Safekeeping on this or something and then protect it and then give all your things counters. What you can do, though, is you can, if say you have a creature that costs only 1 green mana and 3 generic, you can basically play that creature in a multicolored deck more easily because you can effectively make green creatures that cost 1 green mana only take colorless mana. So if you are able to get 2 forest out and then you have other creatures, you can kind of fudge the mana a little bit, right? Because you can make them colorless. I think this card's quite strong. I think if it costs 6 or 7, it would definitely not be playable. It's just too much. But having a 5/5 trample for a 6/6 trample for 5 mana, I think is good. I think this card's going to be an 8. It'll probably see play. Next, we have Keldon Flame Sage. It is 1 red, 2 generic for a human shaman, so it has a relevant creature type. Its power and toughness is 2/3, so not bad for 3 mana, and it also has Enlist. If you're not familiar with Enlist, that is a new mechanic that states when Keldon Flame Sage attacks, you may tap another untapped non-attacking creature without summoning sickness, and then when you do, you add that creature's power to the creature that enlists it. So if you have a 2/2 out, you can tap that when Keldon Flame Sage attacks. It'll be a 4/3. So really, it needs to be blocked if it starts enlisting things. But the next text is where it gets good. Whenever Keldon Flame Sage attacks, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is Keldon Flame Sage's power, which will grow if it enlists things. You may exile an instant or sorcery card with mana value X or less from among them. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. You may cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost. So the potential here is absolutely huge. If this thing sticks on the board, it enlists something, it swings in, you got a 4/3 attacking. It doesn't have to deal the damage to get the card. All of a sudden, you're looking at the top 4 cards of your library. You can instantly burn out one of their creatures that you would be concerned about them blocking with. You can bounce something if you're in Izzet colors. You can say you draw a protection spell. You can protect this. You can do all kinds of stuff. This card is going to be good. It's going to see play. It does need to be built around. It's probably an Izzet burn, mono red burn, or an Izzet control with a ton of sorceries. If it sticks around and you get this power up to 5 or 6, I mean, you're talking about some big sorcery spells, big instant spells. So as those things are revealed, this thing could get either better or worse because it does rely on those things. But I think this is probably an 8 right now. Could be higher than that. This could be a staple depending on what we see. Next, we have Lightning Strike, 1 red, 1 generic, instant. Lightning Strike deals 3 damage to any target. Pretty good. It's going to be very good in limited. This is premium removal for limited. That's lending itself to the fact that we're probably going to see a few more controlling decks in limited because we have Cut Down, we have this, we have, quite frankly, some very good removal, very cheap removal in limited. As far as constructed goes, I'm not sure that this is going to see a ton of play. We have Strangle. Granted, that is sorcery speed, but it only costs 1 red mana. We also have the spells that cost 1 red mana and deal 2 damage to something and exile it or have certain other payoffs. We also see Voltage Surge, which is 1 red mana. It has a potential to deal 4 damage to something, which is 1 more than this if you sacrifice an artifact. So I don't know that we're hurting for red burn spells. Obviously, if this was Lightning Bolt, that would be a different story. Don't know about constructed play here, but limited, absolutely great. I'm going to give it like a 5, just middle of the road on it. So next up, we have a really interesting card situationally with regarding rotation. It's Protected Negotiators, 1 blue, 1 generic for an instant, has a kicker of 1 white mana, and states if this spell was kicked, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token, and counter target spell unless its controller pays 1 colorless mana for each creature that you control. So this counter spell strikes me as not being for control. It's not good enough for control. This counter speaks to me as a tempo, Azorius tempo deck. I'll tell you why. Because paying 2 mana for something, even if you kick it for not a hard counter, and not having a lot of creatures out, you have to have a bunch of creatures out for this to be able to remotely counter some things, especially versus another control deck where they have extra mana and treasure tokens. So reliably to cast this, you need to have like a Delver down, you need to have something on turn 2, and you need to have that counter target spell unless the controller pays at least 2, maybe 3. Now, the kicker is interesting here because it has to be in an Azorius deck, right? You have to have access to white mana, but the spell resolves in a way that if you kick it, you do get a creature, and then that creature does count towards the colorless mana that needs to be paid. So at the bottom line, this is a Jwari Disruption for 2 that has to be kicked. If you don't kick this and you have no creatures, it does absolutely nothing. So they have to pay 0. So this is a very situational counter. I think Tempo likes this. If we see Tempo as a good deck, I think this is going to fit right in there. We are losing counter spells with rotation. We're losing Jwari Disruption, and we are losing you find the Villain's Lair from D&D. So we may see Syncopate being played from Crimson Vow. Syncopate might slot in for Saw It Coming and things like that in control decks, but I don't think this is the one for control decks. I think it's 4. Next, we have Rada's Firebrand. Interesting design on this in the return of Domain. 1 red, 1 generic for a human warrior, so relevant creature type, 3 power, 1 toughness. Whenever Rada's Firebrand attacks, target creature defending player controls with power less than Rada's Firebrand can't block this turn. And it has Domain. Activate for 1 red mana, 5 colorless. Rada's Firebrand gets +2/+2 till end of turn. This ability costs 1 colorless mana less to activate for each basic land type among lands you control. Activate only once each turn. So this is a lot for a 2-drop, and it's a lot to think about, especially with a Domain, when you're going to activate it, what situations it's good in. So I think you play this on turn 2. This has to slot in for its best result into like a Boros aggro, Gruul aggro, something like that. Because if you're playing mono red aggro with this, the Domain always costs 6. That being said, the first block of text on this is quite strong if you're being aggressive. Anything, whenever this attacks anything that they have, you choose 1 that has power less than Rada's Firebrand and it can't block. That's good. This is probably going to get some damage in on turn 3 and 4. Domain can also be used at any time, so you don't have to activate it only as a sorcery. So if you have extra mana up, say this costs 3 or 4, if you have 3 different types of land, you're able to save this from little removal spells. So if they try to burn it out, you can make this all of a sudden a 5/3, so it can avoid some of that. I think where this is really strong is you slam this on turn 2, you just go in, it trades up with something, and then you just keep the pressure on. I think this is good enough to see play. I think this is probably a 6 or 7. Let's say 7, just because it's super aggressive. And if they don't deal with it, you can activate the Domain later as a mana sink and make this a 5/3. Even if they don't block, you can do it then. So, I think it's like a 7. And finally, we have Resolute Reinforcements. 1 white, 1 generic for a creature, human soldier with flash, so you can play it anytime you would play an instant. And when Resolute Reinforcement enters a battlefield, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. Not impressed. Maybe in limited, if there's like a token deck or something that rewards you having a lot of creatures and going wide, that's cool. This is not going to see constructed play. It's 2 mana for 2 1/1s, and you can flash them in, block something, whatever. I think it's a 3. That's going to wrap up the second spoiler video. There will be more as they come out. If you liked the video, you got something from it, please hit that thumbs up for me. It helps me and supports the channel. If you disagree, I'm totally open to that. Leave me a comment below. If there's something that I missed, some synergy that I missed, which I'm sure probably did, because I don't know absolutely every card or anything, just let me know in the comments, and I'll respond back. If you want to see more of these videos, please subscribe. Helps to support the channel, and have a great day.